The Good Kinsman, where culinary dreams come to life. Discover the art of exquisite dining with their curated collection of fine china and premium kitchenware. The Good Kinsman, where every meal is a celebration and a perfect blend of functionality and elegance. The Good Kinsman, located in Chattanooga's North Shore. Welcome to Scarred But Smarter podcast, hosted by Jeff Stiles, presented by Cadis, Counsel for Alcohol and Drug Abuse Services, sharing relatable stories of addiction recovery along with our hearts, our voices, and an abundant amount of love with all of those affected by the disease of addiction. We thank you for allowing us to be a part of your journey. And now, here is your host, Jeff Stiles.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Scarred But Smarter, the still relatively new podcast here at Cadis, Counsel on Alcohol and Drug Abuse Services here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the Scenic City, the Dynamo of Dixie, whatever you want to call it. Just don't call us late to dinner, and we'll show up. My guests today, one in the studio and one by phone. Lisa McCluskey is with us. Lisa, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jeff. Happy to be here.
Her name probably familiar to many of you. Her face would be to some, I'm sure, because she's been around here for quite some time. Long career at CHI Memorial, where
That's
I know
right.
you from. I don't know what you did before that. I've never seen your resume, but you're kind of joined at the hip with that institution.
Yes, I was there for about 15 years almost.
And go ahead and give yourself a plug. What did you do at CHI Memorial? That might actually be important to some people.
Okay. I was the vice president of marketing, communications, physician sales, the nurse triage service, and the physician answering service.
She was a face for all of those things and a spokesperson for all those things, and we're very glad to have you today. Mary is on the line with us, and Mary, I guess I should ask, is your name McCluskey as well, or do you have a new last name?
My last name is Sherbert now.
Sherbert. I can remember that.
Yes.
I can remember that. That's one that'll stick in my head. And Mary is on with us. I think you're actually on vacation right now. Is that true?
Yes, currently I'm in Arizona right now.
Well, good for you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your time off to actually talk to us today. But you're a resident of Atlanta, am I correct?
Yes, I am. I just moved to Atlanta last year from Chattanooga.
How are you liking it so far? I loved Atlanta during the 70s, like most people. And now when I go back, it's like culture shock. It's like you're taking a caveman, unfrozen caveman, podcaster, and throwing him into the middle of some sort of dystopian future world. It's just too much city for me. How are you liking it?
I feel the exact same way you do. It's definitely a huge culture shock from Chattanooga, that's for sure.
Especially the traffic. I think the last time I was in Atlanta, I rolled down my windows and just shouted, "Don't you people have homes?" Trying to get from point A to point B down there.
They say it takes an hour to get from Atlanta to Atlanta. So
now, Mary, I'm going to bounce back to you in just a second, but I want to bring Lisa in because she's the one here with me. She's the one I'm looking directly across from. So I'm going to start with you. Frame up this conversation, this short conversation we're about to have. Why are we talking? Why are we actually in each other's presence this day?
Well, first of all, I think it's so important to raise awareness of not only what Cadis does, but bring to light the journey of addiction, because oftentimes people go through it in the dark and they don't know the resources that are available here in Chattanooga. They have a lot of fear that people will judge them if they do seek help. But then for me, the most important thing is the role of a parent. What does a parent do when they discover a child is in addiction? And, I can speak personally for myself. I didn't at first know what to do. I felt it was a reflection on my role as a mother. I had somehow failed as a mother when we went through that. So I wanted to really, delve into that and talk about that story and what parents can do.
Well, thank you for bringing your story and Mary's story to us today. And you are absolutely correct. There's there's no end to the judging that somebody will put themselves under in scenarios like this. Both the user, the substance user and abuser, and the addict, and also the family members who feel like what did they do wrong? Mary, now this kind of jumps over into the ball has been tossed into your court now. This is really your story, your drug and or drugs of choice, and give me just the synopsis, the nutshell version of how you went from point A to point B, once again, despite Atlanta traffic, and how you got to where you are right now.
Well, I'll start. My drug of choice was going to be heroin, or really any form of opiates. It started with pills, and then, when those became harder to get, switched into heroin. But it started pretty young for me. I was introduced to, other drugs as a teenager, and it really wasn't until I moved to Chattanooga and I started dating my daughter's dad, where he really introduced me to opiates. So I had a few years of using before, my mother decided, hey, like, I'm going to take your child. You cannot live in my house if this is what you're going to choose to do, because that was after the second time I had went to rehab, and gotten treatment. So, she finally put, her fist down and was like, I can't allow you to live this way around our family.
Your story, unfortunately, is not an uncommon one. We saw, of course, with the opiate addiction, craziness that we've been through for the last, couple of decades. It was almost impossible for an old school person like me. I'll be 64 this weekend. So I came up during the 70s, and drugs were everywhere. The one drug that nobody did early on and would always say, I'll never do that, was heroin. I mean, yeah, I'll smoke dope, I'll do speed, I'll snort coke, I'll do all this stuff, I'm going to drink all day. And that's just good old-fashioned American fun, right? But heroin, that's something totally different. Nobody was more surprised than baby boomers like myself when it suddenly came back into vogue. Mm-hmm. And it truly did. It went from almost obscurity to suddenly one of the biggest drug problems we have in America today. Sounds like you rode that wave.
Yep, I definitely did, especially I spent some years growing up in South Florida where there was a lot of pill mills. So a lot of the people I was hanging out with had, multiple prescriptions for these pills. And then when they started reeling in the pill mills, that's when a lot of people I was hanging out with moved into heroin because it was just so much more accessible than the pills.
Talk about the slippery slope. How many
yes.
of us, me included, and I know other people inside this room, not Lisa, have done the same thing and said the same thing. It was all good in the beginning because a doctor prescribed it or it was legal. And so we boldly take those steps down the corridor and end up, on the wrong road in the wrong place. And next thing you know, what? I can't find any of my oxys. I think I'll go ahead and try this little corner of this bag this guy gave me. Next thing you know, you're off to the races. It's you and horse.
Yep, that's exactly it.
I'm going to go to Lisa. When did you actually realize, how young was your daughter? When did you realize you really had an issue? She had one on her hands, you had one on your hands.
Really, it wasn't until she was older and had a child. And I have to tell you, I also was a product of the 70s, graduated high school in 75. So when, at that time, it was pot, it was LSD. I never tried any of that. I was always the chicken in the room. I was always afraid that if I tried anything, I would, jump off a roof or something.
We always liked somebody like you being there in case the phone rang.
Right, exactly.
Somebody had to answer the phone,
yeah,
right?
So I was pretty clueless about the signs and the symptoms of what was going on. And it really wasn't until she was full on into the heroin that I recognized it and realized what was happening. Yeah,
you're going to pick up on it at some point. And now, did you think, Mary? Did you think you were getting away with it, at least in the beginning? I'm assuming that by the time you had a child and you're leaning on your mom like any new mother is going to, whenever possible. Did you think you were getting away with it for any length of time?
Up until it started getting really bad, basically up until when I started injecting, I thought, everything was fine, that she just wouldn't figure it out, that there was nothing really wrong, and then once the injecting started, it became much harder to hide that from her. And, she very much caught on quickly to the signs of what I was doing.
Okay, that's an aha moment no parent ever wants to have, and I'm gonna go to that. And Lisa, at one point, you know your daughter's dealing with something. You're feeling for, you're praying for her, and then you see track marks. That had to have been an eventful day, to say the least.
Well, she was working this whole time. Mary was working, so you can dismiss a lot of the symptoms, if you will, of, oh, she's tired, she's working, she's got a child.
Sure.
And it wasn't until she would come home and I would see these black marks on her face. And I never really saw track marks because Mary, was smart and wore long sleeves. And like I said, she was working.
Addicts are clever.
Right. But then she would sit down at the time where we lived. My former husband had a man cave in the garage, and we'd be watching TV. She'd come home from work, and she would be nodding out, and that
nodding off is the red flag.
Right. So between the black marks on her face and the nodding out, then I started to say, something's going on here that's not just a tired mom.
For those truly out of the circle, what do the black marks on her face, what does that actually relate to? I think we all know what a track mark is.
Right. Well, the black marks are from when you have to cook the heroin to turn it into a liquid to inject yourself. So she would do, well, I'm making some assumptions here. I think she was doing it in her car so she could inject herself before she came in the house. And so she would have the black marks from the, burning the spoon. And then coming in the house.
I have the entire video in my head, unfortunately. And Mary, I guess at some point you had to just throw up your hands and just give up the ghost. Say, okay, I'm in trouble. I need help. How far down the road were you before you were able to do that?
Well, it took, the first time I went to treatment, she took me there, and I was like, you know what, I have a kid. I'm going to try. I didn't think I was that bad at that point. So I did inpatient. I think I made it just a couple weeks after I graduated. I went back to using. I did another inpatient after that, maybe a few months later. And then I, again, only stayed clean a couple months after I got out of inpatient. Well, the third time is when she finally, all the other times she was still letting me live in the house. She was, still letting me be around. Mm-hmm. And the third time she finally was like, I was hanging out with these other addicts, and, my daughter was around. So she came and she took my daughter and she said, look, you're not coming back to my house. I'm taking Emery, she's coming with me. You're not going to be around her. You're not going to have her by yourself. And I think it was only maybe 3 weeks after that, I called her up and I said, hey, I just want to let you know I'm going to check myself into treatment tomorrow. And I don't think she believed me at first. And then, I was like, no, I want to get help. I want to go to treatment. And, she took me to Focus the next morning, let me stay the night at her house one last night, and took me to Focus. And that was finally what I needed. I think it needed to be fully coming from me, with no one else pushing me to do it for it to, really stick.
If you knew that early on, you were already ahead of the game, that you had to do it for you. But I want to go straight after our first little break here. We're going to let our underwriters and sponsors have a little bit of a say in what's happening in today's podcast. I want to go to the tough love almost immediately, but I do have to ask you, actually say this. This again, for those out there who do not deal with addiction, I know it's hard for you to wrap your brain around this, but just think about Mary's story. She is using IV drugs, the heaviest, hardest, most notorious drug ever known to man, while she has an infant daughter, and she was still thinking, but I'm doing it at a level where I'm okay. I'm using it at a level where it's really not an issue. I'm okay right now. That's what the addict's brain does. You look back on that now, I'm sure, and you think, my God, what was I thinking? But it made perfect sense to you at the time. You were functioning.
Yep, that's exactly it. Yep.
Marsha's Backstreet Cafe, a homey local eatery in Chattanooga, serves up the best burgers, daily blue plate specials, Marsha's famous tuna and chicken salad, and if you're looking for a great catering option to feed a crowd, Marsha has you covered. Marsha's Backstreet Cafe on Brainerd Road in Chattanooga is a go-to local favorite. Step into a world of beauty and elegance at Gillinkert Flowers, Chattanooga's premier destination for every floral occasion, where beauty meets elegance in every gift and bloom. Gillinkert Flowers, located in Chattanooga's North Shore.
All right, Lisa, I want to get to tough love here in a second. That's going to be a huge focus of what we're doing today. But you yourself are a podcaster. I've thrown that out there already as, identifying myself. But tell everybody real quickly, get a plug in for what you're doing. And it's really inspired from this same story.
Oh, well, actually, my podcast is called the Silver Divorce Podcast. I was married 34 years, and 17 months after I retired, I was faced with divorce. So in that whole process, I discovered, first of all, how many boomers are divorcing. They are the most divorced generation of our time. But also, there's a distinct knowledge and education gap of going through the process. And I found that I could help people, not only help them through the emotional aspect, but help them with the legal process. So I started a podcast in March of this year, and it's doing exceptionally well. We've had over 6,500 plays in just across 14 episodes. So again, it's on all the podcasting platforms that you can name: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Pandora.
Good for you. What a great idea. I mean, niche without a doubt, but I mean, a very important niche. And as you said, one that's growing, unfortunately. And one that most people I don't think ever think about. So good for you. And there is no better example in the world of media of a slow build. It's almost a necessity. It's almost baked into the cake. A podcast is always going to have a slow build, and to the point where some influencer jumps on you and you become an overnight success after doing it for 3 decades. Yeah. So the tough love part. At what point, when she said you put your foot down, describe that process to me.
Oh, sure.
Lisa McCluskey, my guest in here, and Mary, her daughter, on the line with us.
I will never forget. It is burned into my memory, that moment when I made the decision that we had to take a drastic step. I was at, I'm sure you're familiar with Pink, the gala.
Yes, been there more than a few times. I still own a tux, believe it or not.
Yeah, I'll bet you have. Yes. Wonderful event. But anyway, I was at the Pink pre-party, and I had gotten a call from the other grandmother, and found out that Mary hadn't been seen for a couple of days, and she was staying there, and they were worried about her. So at that moment, I got on the phone and I called every single person I possibly thought would be connected to Mary to find her. And I made some significant threats of bodily harm to some people to give up where she
Mama
could be.
Bear, yeah.
And drove to a location where somebody said they thought she was. And it was a place where, there were people partying.
Ill repute.
Yes. And I knew the fastest way to get the attention of people outside would be to sit out there and blare your horn. So that's what I did until somebody came out, and I was asking if she was there. Well, she had gone somewhere, but Emery, her daughter, was there. So I went up into the house to get Emery, and that was it for me. Emery was just maybe 18 months. She was pretty young. I took her into my arms, and she said, "There's bad people in that house." And
how old?
She was about 18 months, I think, at the time.
Yeah, close to 2.
Yeah. So
language was already, it was just in the beginning stages, and she already knew how to say that.
She already knew how to say that. And that
bad people.
That broke my heart.
I bet.
And that was it for me. That was the moment that we are not going on anymore with this.
Let me interrupt for a second. Mary, I know you guys have had this conversation many times over, but that's got to hurt still hearing that. How does that make you feel just hearing that story?
It hurts, that I allowed my daughter to be in that situation, that I couldn't see clearly enough when I had her, that my lifestyle needed to change. It just kind of got worse as she got, from when I had her until then. And, I just felt like a failure as a mother, and, it just broke my heart that I allowed my life to get to that point with my daughter involved.
And, looking back, I think, again, anybody who's actually gotten to the point where they have to go to rehab and really concentrate, and it becomes, primary in their life, that the number one job they have is to stay straight and sober, can probably, if they had kids, have similar stories. I'm not even the least bit happy to report that I drove drinking more times than I could possibly ever count with my kids in the car. It was just part of my daily life. Pure and simple. I measured the distances that I drove by how many beers I actually drank on the way. There would be a beer between my legs pretty much 24/7 if I was in the vehicle. And to get from here to my family home down in Georgia was a 3-beer trip. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm ashamed to say it, but that's just the way it was. And my kids were in the car. I can't deny that. So we've been there, but I know it still must hurt. And gosh, it sounds, to me, Lisa, it was almost, I said Mama Bear, but I'm picturing Michael Douglas from the movie Crash,
right.
Diving into the literally the den of iniquity, and with very sketchy characters, and going, you're going to deal with me.
And I was in a white suit. That's what I was all dressed up. I left the gala pre-party. I was in a white suit, and I was going to find her that night. And I don't know if Mary remembers this, but the next day I drove her past the homeless shelter for women, and I said, "This is where I'm taking you tomorrow, and we are done." And so, but then she left on her own. I said, "If this is your lifestyle, you're going to live it without involving Emery or without involving us."
Making pop culture references is one of my strong points. I could do it all day long, but we've seen this play out in TV shows and movies and in literature from day one, in plays and everything of this nature. But it's all based on reality. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the toughest times in the world to have to tell one of your children, you are in the process of failing. I'm not saying you're a failure, but you're going there fast. I'm going to have to step in and take adult rights away from you.
And it's terrifying. I was absolutely terrified that one day I would get that call that she had overdosed, and I prayed so hard. And also I saw it as a failure as a mother, so I didn't tell anybody. I had made friends in Chattanooga at that time. I cut off all my friends. I didn't want to tell anybody. Didn't know if I was handling it the right way. I was terrified I would get that call. And then, as Mary shared, she called me one day and said, "I don't want to live this way anymore."
Lisa McCluskey, my guest here in the studio. Scarred but Smarter, the Cadis podcast is what you're listening to. Her daughter, Mary, former heroin user. How long have you been clean now?
10 years and 2 months.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Do you still go to 12-step meetings? Will you get a chip? A coin?
I do not go anymore. I did about 5 or 6 years in the rooms. And then I just kind of, found my own way to do my recovery, and just, which I'm so grateful for the 12-step programs, and NA NA saved my life. If I wouldn't have gone to, those meetings after I got out and built that camaraderie, and then I was involved with I did H&I, went to facilities and helped, spread the message as well. If I wasn't involved right after getting out of treatment, I don't think I would have, made it. Having those people,
I can echo
support
that all
you.
day long. There's no doubt in my mind it saved my life, and I'm still here today. And I still do. I regularly attend meetings because that's the program I work. Not making any judgment on yours at all. Your relationship with Cadis, I know that you just mentioned, we used a lot of jargon in the world of recovery, and you just said H&I.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know what that means. Tell me about how you and Cadis have interacted.
So H&I is hospitals and institutions. It's where you bring in meetings, like outside meetings into facilities. So I did a couple at Cadis. I did a lot at the Schultz Center, the juvenile center. So it's where we bring in these meetings to these facilities where the patients can't get out to go to their own meetings. And then it just kind of brings a little bit more hope that there is the ability to get clean and stay clean when you get out.
Lisa, do you think that your involvement with the health care field and your placement where you were at CHI Memorial for so many years, do you think it helped, hindered? Did it have an effect at all? Did it give you any insight, or did it make you even more ashamed? I can't have this position and be in this position.
Yeah, I think it made me more wanting to stay in the dark about it. And I really haven't talked about it much at all publicly. This is the first time I can say I am openly talking about what happened.
Really?
There are people who know me who won't even know the story. I just retreated into myself. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to share that is there is no reason to be ashamed. It is, addiction has so many faces, and so it isn't a failure. It's not a moral failure. There's so many other aspects to it, and we need to lean on each other. When Mary was going through treatment, I went with her to the therapy sessions, and then I went to some of the meetings and gave rides to people. And I think that's an important aspect as well. If you can, a lot of times people can't get to meetings because they have no way. Offer those rides if you can give rides to people.
Let me say, I'm very honored that you're actually sharing the story then, if this is your first real public, outing with this very, very personal account of what has happened in your life. I'm very honored that you're doing it here on this podcast. And I hope that Mary Catherine Gentry, wherever she is out there who started this thing listening, hope that she takes that as the compliment that it is meant to be and should be.
Well, it's important. This podcast is important to reach people. We have to bring things out into the light. There's so many misconceptions about addiction still to this day.
The more people come out of the darkness and share their stories, the more understanding there certainly will be. Now, in the 12-step world, of course, we are told part of the traditions, part of the steps, part of the whole program is there's a reason that it's anonymous.
Right.
And for people like me and Mary, see, if we get out and we start bragging about how it works and then we fail, it doesn't reflect very well on the program. You don't want to do that. So you're 20 years sober and suddenly you're putting yourself out there like some sort of paragon of virtue. Look what I did. And then you stumble, which humans do. It looks bad on the program. You don't have that. You just have the society stigma that you've clearly dealt with most of your life. But I applaud you very much so.
Yeah, we're humans, and humans are going to fail. And hopefully we get back up again and try again. And there's nothing wrong with that. Mary went to treatment 3 times. And if she had stopped after one and continued with her lifestyle, she probably wouldn't be here today. So just like when in business, when I was working, I would tell people, if you're not failing 10% of the time, you're not succeeding. Failure will be part of it.
I have to ask, did addiction run in the family? I mean, I know you've got your own podcast on divorce. I don't necessarily want to walk into that buzzsaw, but I mean, either on one side of the family or the other, did it run in the blood, literally?
Well, I would honestly say my dad, while he might not recognize that he is an addict, he went to treatment for alcohol before he met my mother, and he was in AA, and now he still drinks quite heavily. And, I think that he is not maybe as cognizant until what he is. But I would say, there definitely is a history on that side.
That's not uncommon, as we all know. Scarred but Smarter, the podcast that is presented and supported by Cadis, Council on Alcohol and Drug Abuse Services here in beautiful Chattanooga, Tennessee. Historic and pivotal city here in the Southeast, and a city that's transformed so much in the time that I've lived here from the mid-'80s till now. And I can tell you that one, constant has been Cadis throughout that time. And we've seen, the pros and cons, the ups and downs, the roller coaster ride of addiction in America. Has been, pretty much personified in miniature here in the city of Chattanooga. We've seen the rise of fentanyl. Did that ever? My guest, of course, as Lisa McCluskey from CHI Memorial for years and years and years. You recognize her voice and face with that institution, that organization, that wonderful healthcare outlet here in town. Her daughter Mary. Did you ever get into the world of fentanyl? The last couple of discussions we've had on this podcast have dealt with that. Still a relatively newcomer in the world of drugs and substances to be abused.
So when I was using, there was fentanyl, but it was in these patches that were, you didn't, as an injecting heroin addict, you didn't want to use those because you couldn't inject them. So where there was some fentanyl in the patches, and it was still very medical necessity for people, it really wasn't as prevalent. There were still people overdosing on heroin and stuff, but it definitely wasn't as prevalent as it is now. I've lost so many people to fentanyl overdoses. My daughter's dad died because of heroin laced with fentanyl.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, my nephew's dad died because of heroin laced with fentanyl. So it's definitely what I'm very lucky because when I was using, it wasn't as prevalent. I think if I was using during this time, we probably wouldn't, when fentanyl was prevalent, I probably wouldn't be here. A lot of people are dying.
Well, I can say easily the same thing, and I dodged a lot of bullets in my life. Had ecstasy been around when I was younger, I don't know that I ever would have steered up out of that ditch. Hey, it was fun. That's one of the reasons people do drugs. I mean, they work.
Yeah.
They actually work. Heroin, I can say, I snorted it many times, never shot. And isn't that odd that we would set these particular places and points and time and in our own actions and reactions, and we say, well, I won't go beyond this. This is where this is beyond the pale. This is the Mendoza line for me. I would snort the drug, get it quicker than you would if you were smoking it or had it through a patch, but I wouldn't break the skin. And, that point had to exist for you too, Mary. There had to be a point. You said, okay, I'll go there now.
Yeah, for me, a lot of the people I was hanging out with started doing meth as well. And that was like my line. My line was like, I'm injecting heroin, but I will never touch meth like that. And they would offer it to me like, oh, well, by the time you come down, you won't be sick from not having heroin. And I was like, I'd rather be sick. So it's like, yeah, you have these arbitrary lines where you're like, I'll do that, but not that,
And if fentanyl's out there and you know good and well that the chances of you dying are exponentially higher than any other drug, but still when you're in the throes of that, that's not you. That doesn't mean you. That means somebody else, right?
Yeah, exactly. You think it'll never happen to me. This won't happen to me. But then you see people around you, dying.
And Lisa,
and you still think it won't be you.
And Lisa, you had to be sitting there with, all of your clarity of mind and all the worries that come with being a parent, a mother, a grandmother, and thinking to yourself, like you said, you fear that phone call that's going to come in. Had you resigned yourself to that? Had you, at any given point, did you say, you know what, my daughter's going to be a statistic, my granddaughter can't be?
Right, I did. I expected it. I just felt someday that call is going to come in. And, I'm a religious person and a Catholic, so I believed in the power of prayers to St. Jude. I was praying as hard as I could, but just fearing and steeling myself to the eventuality that call would come in that she had overdosed.
Help my non-Catholic self out. St. Jude Lost Causes?
Yes.
The Saint of Lost Causes?
The Saint of Lost Causes.
And, well, let me ask you this. In your peer group, so you came up probably a social drinker, everything's okay, you had some issues possibly with your ex and anything like that. In your peer group right now, are you aware of the fact that there are still people out there that look like you, act like you, work in your circles, socialize, that are active users of drugs as powerful as heroin? Because it's actually, talking about the silver divorce, it's a silver drug right now to a large degree.
Yeah, and actually, I've invited Cadis to come on to my show in a couple of weeks to talk about the rise in drug and alcohol addiction in seniors. it is a real problem. But, who really made me aware of the number of professionals that are using is my middle daughter, Elizabeth. She has a cleaning business and cleans for Airbnbs and residences and businesses. She told me, Mom, you would be shocked if you knew how many lawyers, how many doctors, how many executives where I go clean, where there's cocaine on the table next to them,
and remnants of people that are actually cooking here and
right.
using there, and
Yeah.
all the stuff that comes with it, all the flotsam and jetsam.
Yes, it's more prevalent than I would ever have imagined.
That's amazing. Now, Lisa, I'm going to go back to and we'll be wrapping up here in a little bit. Now, again, I appreciate you taking the time on your vacation to talk to us today. It's been very enlightening. When you were in the junk house, all right, you've got your daughter in there, you're hanging out, your mom comes and just lays on the horn until somebody goes out there and deals with her. How cognizant were you at that point of what the scenario was, of how serious, how dire your own situation was, where you'd put yourself? Was your mom just bugging you at that point? Were you just wanting her to go away? Or
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that really was what opened my eyes. I wasn't there when she pulled up. Of course, everyone at the house was calling me like, hey, your mom just came and took your child. And in my head, I'm like, oh my God, my mom just took my kid. I'm never going to see my kid again. What am I doing? If she's at this point where she's willing to come and take Emery from me, she'll never forgive me. It really was the pivotal moment that was like, something's got to change. I've got to do something different.
You ran her past the homeless shelter for women. Who are down on their luck. Did you ever actually use the threat of law enforcement against her, Lisa?
No, I didn't. I didn't, because I didn't want to ruin, the rest of her life for what could be a career if she was able to turn her life around. And, I've seen that too many times, where mistakes when somebody is young haunts them when they're pulling themselves up. So no, I never threatened law enforcement.
My mom passed away last Thanksgiving, and she watched her husband just fall into alcoholism, and a very heavy, ugly alcoholism it was, even though he recovered fairly quickly and stayed pretty much on the straight and narrow for the rest of his days. I lost an aunt several months ago, and I went to her funeral, and my oldest cousin was eulogizing her and said she was the greatest enabler known to man. And he was being extremely brutally honest, like you get a lot of brutal honesty at 12-step funerals. And said she was a saint, but she was an enabler. She allowed me and my father, my uncle, to continue to use far beyond what any logical, sensible, normal person would have allowed. But that was just her nature. And I can't address mother-daughter relationships. I'm going to ask you guys, and I'll start with you, Lisa. Do you think that there is something in that bond that is truly exceptionally special that helped you guys get to where you are now?
Yeah, I think I would have done anything at all. Just being willing to show up at a house where people are partying and burst your way in. I would have gotten her any help that she needed. But then I also came to the realization that I can't do it for her. If she doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. So that's a fine line between being that protective mama bear, willing to do anything, and realizing that you have to let them do it themselves.
And kind of the same question to you, Mary, and that's we all, you've heard the phrase, we hurt the ones we love. Well, they're more convenient for one, but also they're the ones most likely to forgive you. So sometimes we trod upon those relationships longer and harder than any others. But you've already basically pointed out the fact that that was kind of a light bulb moment from you when Mom, who you obviously respected, said, you know what, that's it, end of the road.
Yeah, that definitely was the moment I think I really needed, knowing that this woman who stood by me through everything, was kind of done with me, and then, also to the point where she thinks that I can't even have my daughter, it was just a moment that was like, wow, I've hurt this person who has literally been there through every single thing in my life, has supported me when she didn't have to, and I've pushed her now to this point where she wants nothing to do with me. Like, something's got to give, it just hurt me so much to know that I had pushed her to that point.
I have said this on this podcast more than a few times now. I hope I'm right in saying it. It's an old little truism, an old axiom that goes back a long, long ways, back to the beginning days of Bill W., and that's that men normally, their rock bottom involves their job. When their job is at risk or lost, that's when they really wake up and go, God, I've screwed up. For women, it usually is the family. I think there's enough truth in that for it to essentially become a cliche, a truism. And I can't tell you how many times in my life, before and after recovery and my journey in recovery, I have seen women who have been a hot mess and do not fix anything until their relationship with their children is at stake. A woman losing custody of her child may be the strongest medicine I've ever seen in my life.
Oh yeah, I completely, and she never did it legally, but she was like, I'm going to legally get custody. And that just, I was like, that just can't happen. Not that she couldn't raise my daughter. I just didn't want someone else to be raising my daughter. That's my child. I should be able to get my life together enough to raise her. And that was definitely the step I needed to really push me into recovery.
Is there anything that you would like to add, Mary, while you're on with us? Anything that we didn't touch on, or any plugs you want to give or shout outs you want to make?
Just, that it is possible to keep going and to stay clean and to live a great life. Right now I, bodybuild, and that really keeps me focused, and, because doing drugs and bodybuilding just doesn't mix. So it's like, I found something to put myself into that, makes me happy and makes me feel fulfilled. And if you find that something, that makes you feel that way, it definitely makes staying clean so much easier. And it makes it just not even something you think about. It just happens. You just do it. It just becomes your life.
I'm glad you brought up the bodybuilding. It was something that was said actually when we were off mic in here, and I meant to go there. And that is, physical activity, a huge, huge plus. The endorphins that you get from lifting, I'm sure, and the intense, workouts you must undergo to actually, qualify as a bodybuilder, that goes a long way into, satisfying that urge, that need that you used to have for drugs, that big hole that you had in your life that you tried to fill with substances. Do you still have cravings? Do you still ever go back and go, God, I wish I could obliterate myself again?
Honestly, no, not at this point, because my mind, anytime I think about using, it is the bottom depth of it. That's what my mind goes to when I think about using, is like, do you want to have nothing again and live, be homeless, have your family not want to be around you? After so many years, it's just, as long as you remember, the first thought you have is always going to be the worst part of it, it really curbs that craving, because I know a lot of addicts, they think about the good times of when they were using. I made a point from the beginning when I first got clean. When I think about using, I always think about the worst parts of it. Yeah, so that was something that's really helped me.
Yeah, magical memory, the romanticizing the good times. It's easy to do. It's easy. Again, I don't want to speak for anybody, and I'm representing, I guess, Curtis to a degree here, but I'm not one of those guys that can say, my worst day sober is better than my best day using. No, that would just be a lie. I had fun. It worked for me until it didn't, and then it didn't work at a level that I can't even describe. It is now poison. It's toxic. But no, I can't look back and go, it was all bad. I can't ever say that. Again, I'll say, there's a reason that people do drugs. They make them feel better in the moment, and put a big old underline on that in the moment. In the long run, it cannot work. It does not work. It will eventually not work. And Lisa, I'll ask you if there's anything you'd just like to add in closing.
I would add, if you're going through this, don't go through it in the dark. Don't go through it in silence.
Alone.
Don't go through it alone. Right. There are people who are suffering as well. There are people who've been through it who can help. CADIS is a wonderful resource, and it can get better. People do recover, and they do go on to lead fabulous lives. And I'm very proud of my daughter, Mary. She has really been through it, and she's doing so well. She's a career woman after my heart, and and a bodybuilder as well. So.
Mary Sherbert, our guest on the phone here on the line, and Lisa McCluskey here in the studio. And my final question then would be that if somebody is out there in your situation, either one of y'all's situation, any of our situations, and they're listening and they know either they or their loved one has got to come to the same conclusion. They got to do it. This is stuff they got to take. They got to do it for them. Are there any particular resources that you used? Don't do it alone. Mm-hmm. As you said, is there anybody out there that maybe they haven't thought about they could call this person, that entity, that organization, that phone number, that website?
I always have recommended actually CADIS. I've helped multiple people. They came to me and were like, "Hey, Mary, like, what can I do?" Even my mom actually took my daughter's dad, before he passed, to CADIS. I've always said, especially because people are like, I don't have money for rehab. I don't have money for treatment. I was like, CADIS will take care of you. You can get grants. There's so many options. And then, I always direct people to the NA website so they could find the nearest meeting, but anytime someone's reached out to me, I personally try to help them the best I can and to find them resources, because I feel like that's, as someone who's in recovery, it's kind of, part of our responsibility to help other addicts in the best way we can. Step
12. And Lisa, it's kind of the same question for you. Anything is there a directional signpost you can point somebody to?
Gosh, I wish there were. Being in the dark and not wanting to tell anybody, I went online and just started searching for resources, and I read everything I could get my hands on regarding, how not to enable somebody going through addiction. And, Mary touched on that. I had taken her child's father to CADIS. That was another case of intervention where, the mother was enabling, and I put my foot down and said, this cannot continue, and got him into treatment. So, unfortunately, he relapsed. And
well, I'm very sorry for your loss. Yeah. I really am. And unfortunately, that's where we all end up if we don't take a hard turn. Right. If we're dealing with this sort of scenario, I guess for some people, maybe Bill W. is one of those, they can have a bright light shining moment and God enters the room and everything's okay. Most of us, it's a long slog, and it's something you live with for the rest of your life. Mary, thank you so much for joining us. I wish you the best, and I hope that you stay strong, both physically and spiritually, and all the rest of the good things that come along with it, and that your life continues glowingly down the path.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad I got to participate in this. Thank you so much for having me on.
And Lisa, what a wonderful, little coda to a fantastic career that you've had, your podcast and what you're doing here, trying to open people's eyes and hearts. And good for you. You're just doing good work. You've done good, girl.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me on as well. It's important. I was very nervous about even beginning to tell this story, but you've made it very comfortable for me. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I want to just say this. Our guest a couple of weeks ago, Bill Race, I want to say something. That show and then his subsequent appearance on the local talk radio station with my old buddy JR and Jed Mescon and all the folks with my alma mater. I can't tell you how many people told me that was one of the most powerful interviews they'd ever heard. So listen to this podcast, listen to Lisa's podcast, listen to all these sources when they're dealing with this topic. I mean, information is never going to hurt you.
That's right.
Lack of information can doom you. So get smart, folks.
Scarred But Smarter is presented by CADIS, Council for Alcohol and Drug Abuse Services, Chattanooga's only nonprofit addiction recovery center with a full continuum of care, offering the highest quality of treatment to those struggling with substance abuse disorder, regardless of their ability to pay. Go to cadis.org to learn more about our recovery and aftercare programs or to make a donation, because every gift is much needed and greatly appreciated. Thank you for letting us be a part of your journey. Find us online at cadis.org. Ferguson Bath Kitchen and Lighting Gallery, your destination for luxury home products that elevate every room in your house. Whether you're renovating your dream bathroom, designing a gourmet kitchen, or illuminating your living space with style, Ferguson has everything you need to turn your vision into reality. Transform your home into a sanctuary of sophistication with Ferguson Bath Kitchen and Lighting Gallery, where luxury meets inspiration. Ferguson proudly supports Cadis.
If you or someone you know is struggling with alcohol or drug abuse, reach out, seek support. Recovery is within reach. You are not alone, and Cadis will support you or your loved one every step of the way. Please call Cadis today for an assessment, 423-756-7644.